Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, for the May and August 2021 SEMA Strategic Case Study Examination Pre-Scene Initial Reading, segment number 1. So, as you know, we can have a look. The company that has been assigned is Arfield, and there's a very interesting statement before we look into the relevant piece for this segment. There's a COVID-19 statement which says this pre-scene and the case study in general, while aiming to reflect real life, are set in a context where the COVID-19 pandemic has not had an impact. Remember, marks in the exam will be awarded for valid arguments that are relevant to the question asked. Answers that make relevant references to the pandemic or social distancing will, of course, be marked on their merits. So you may refer to the pandemic, but they will only be given merit based on their relevance. So as long as they are valid arguments, you're good to go. In most cases, however, candidates may find it helpful to assume that there are no restrictions to the movement of people, goods, or services in place. So especially in terms of supply chain disruptions, it would be better to assume that there are none and that the pandemic has had no impact. So here we have Arfield, and it's a 37-page document, pre-scene. I've divided it into mainly 4 segments. The first segment, this one, we will be reading through the airports and air travel industry explanation piece before we move into the Arfield or the company segment. So let's look at the business and the industry. Airports and air travel. So let's try to touch base. The objective of this segment is the hope that by the end of going through this piece of the pre-scene, we will have the understanding that the examiner expects us to have with respect to the airport operations industry, because the company that has been assigned this time is an airport operations management company. So we need to really understand, what does an airport's operation management involve? That is what we will do. Firstly, before we look into external sources, the research, all of that, firstly, obviously we are going to use the pre-scene. So let's start reading. All right, so airports and air travel. Airports provide the necessary facilities to enable commercial air travel by passengers and the transportation of freight. They generally occupy large sites that include, so here you have a table that explains some very key and frequently used words with respect to airport operations. Firstly, the runway. Commercial airliners and freight planes require a stable runway that is long enough for planes to accelerate to flying speed when taking off and to decelerate to a safe stop when landing. Runways are usually paved with concrete to ensure that they are sufficiently strong and stable to permit takeoffs and landings. That is what a runway is. Basically a concrete space, a concrete road, very large one, that allows planes to take off and land. Then taxiways and aprons. Once on the ground, planes require paved roadways to enable them to taxi to and from the runway, and also aprons on which they can park. Taxiways are effectively roadways that are wide enough to permit aircraft to taxi safely. Aprons are areas of flat ground that allow for freedom of movement and for aircraft parking. Both are usually paved with concrete. So taxiways that enable the movement from the runway. Aprons are spaces where planes can park. Passenger terminals. Airport terminals provide all of the facilities required to process departing passengers and their baggage, ensuring that they get to their planes on time for departure. Terminals also include the facilities required by arriving passengers in between disembarking from the aircraft to leaving the airport. So not only for departure but also for arriving, all the passenger facilities are in the passenger terminals. Freight terminals. Most airports offer the facilities required to handle air freight. Some aircraft are designed to carry only cargo. Passenger airlines often carry freight alongside passenger baggage in the holds of their aircraft. All right, fair enough. Basically, from what I've known and what I've seen, freight aircrafts only have a little space by their side, and the entire flight fuselage is dedicated to holding cargo. Hangars and maintenance facilities. Aircraft require repairs and routine maintenance in order to ensure they fly safely. Most airports have hangars, which are essentially buildings that are large enough to accommodate an aircraft so engineers can work on it without being exposed to weather. Airlines often rent hangars for their own exclusive use, particularly at large airports. That makes it easier to deal with any technical problems quickly in order to minimize the risk of delaying a departure. So hangars and maintenance facilities are a must. These are spaces where airlines can park their planes and the aircraft so that the engineers can work. Areas of apron may also be set aside so that smaller repairs can be carried out without blocking the movement of other aircraft. There we go. So here this table summarizes and very simply, we really understand what runways, taxiways, aprons, passenger terminals, freight terminals, and hangars and maintenance facilities are. Next, there are two main categories of commercial airport. Let's take a look. A hub airport is a main base for one or more airlines. So if you look at the two main categories, they talk about a hub airport and a non-hub or spoke airport. Firstly, let's take a look at what a hub airport is. What is this? A hub airport is a main base for one or more airlines. That makes it easier to offer connecting flights, which makes it possible for airlines to offer cheaper and more efficient long-haul routes, filling larger aircraft to carry passengers between hubs. Basically, hub airports offer a lot of connecting flights, right? So a lot of passengers move through. For example, NoFly is a major international airline that has a main base at Capital City International Airport. The airline offers return flights between Capital City and many smaller airports, including Crossline Airport in the country of Zealand. A passenger wishing to fly from Crossline to an airport in the country of Farland could take a short-haul NoFly flight to Capital City, connecting to a long-haul flight to Farland International Airport. If necessary, the passenger could connect to a final destination by taking a further short-haul flight from Farland International. There we go. So basically, if you want to move from one country to another through a couple of smaller airports, you cannot do it without connecting through a hub airport. A hub connects flights. Airlines often collaborate with one another using so-called code share agreements. Essentially, these enable passengers to book all of the flights required for a particular journey through a single airline's website, even though one or more of the flights making up that journey will be provided by a different airline. For example, a booking from Crossline Airport to Farland Greentown. So Crossline is in a different country, Farland Greentown is in a different country, might involve NoFly flights to Capital City and Farland International Airport, followed by an Air Farland flight from Farland International to Greentown. So basically, you've got two airlines, NoFly and Air Farland. Now, if you have to take two different airlines and move through three airports, do you have to buy two tickets? Nope, you don't have to, because NoFly and Air Farland have a code share agreement, and so this whole journey could be booked in a single transaction through either airline's website. Code share agreements are important to airports because they give passengers a much wider range of potential destinations. So a hub airport allows connecting flights, and the connections in terms of transactions for passengers to book multiple flights in one ticket or through one ticket through a single transaction is enabled through code share agreements. So these are both important to make passenger lives much easier. The second type is a non-hub or spoke airport, which will generally offer short-haul flights to and from hub airports and will also serve airlines that offer direct flights to short-haul destinations. So basically, these offer short-haul flights to and from hub airports and can serve airlines that offer direct flights to short-haul destinations. There we go. For example, business travelers who live close to Eastern Regional Airport can fly to Southern Regional Airport or Capital City International for meetings. There are no long-haul services from ERA, that is Eastern Regional Airport, but passengers can connect from there to hub airports, including Capital City International. Non-hub airports generally offer short-haul flights of up to roughly 2,000 kilometers. Hub airports offer a mixture of both short-haul and long-haul flights. So basically, a hub airport doesn't really have a limitation, whereas non-hub airports offer predominantly short-haul flights which fall within 2,000 kilometer distances. Passengers often use hub airports for relatively short journeys. For example, business travelers and tourists frequently fly from Eastern Regional Airport to Capital City International for meetings or leisure. So there we go. If we can really understand the difference between a short haul flight, which is basically distances which are roughly about 2,000 kilometers and within the same airspace, same country, as opposed to long haul flights where you're traveling multiple flights connecting through multiple airports, even maybe one or sometimes two, very long distances like flights from Sydney to New York, Sydney to Los Angeles, Sydney to Heathrow. All these very long flights are long haul flights which are done through hub airports. Short haul flights centered through non-hub airports. In fact, there is a very nice diagram here which gives us a view on how hub and spoke airport routes work. And here you have three countries: Farland, Noland and Sealand. Right? So let's say, for example, you just want to travel from Crossline to Farland Greentown. Here you cannot directly take a flight from Crossline to Farland. That's not possible. What you have to do is you have to go from Crossline to CCI, then CCI to Farland International, and Farland International to Farland Greentown. So basically about 3 stops. This is the first stop, or rather first route, this is the second route, and this is the third route. Now if these 3 routes, right, you're connecting through 2 hubs and your destinations are 2 non-hub or spoke airports, what if these 3 routes are of multiple airlines? That is where the concern is. Now code share agreements, if the 2 airlines share their codes, then in the websites, if you log into their websites, you can just put in your departure destination as Crossline, arrival destination as Farland Greentown, and they will offer you this route A, B, C with the connections. In a single transaction, you can book your ticket and just travel. That is what is enabled through code share agreements. So this is a simple but very effective explanation of how hub and spoke airport routes enable you to travel long haul. As opposed to short haul destinations, you're basically, say for example, Eastern Regional Airport and Southern Regional Airport. This is a short haul flight in the same country within the around the distance of 2,000 kilometers. You don't really have to connect through capital city. If you want to, you can. Let's say you're a business traveler and you have meetings, then sure, you travel here to capital city because you have meetings there. Then through that you connect to the southern city because you have meetings there. But if that is not the case, if you just have to go from ERA to SRA, just take the short haul flight and you don't really have to connect. A single flight does the job. Hub and spoke airport routes. There we go. And that brings me to the next segment, flight operations. An airport's design will affect the number of flights that it can handle and its ability to deal with passengers and freight. Airport's design. Air operations are dictated by the size and the number of runways. Larger aircraft require longer runways to give them room to accelerate when taking off and to decelerate when landing. Ideally, runways will be oriented so that the prevailing wind blows along them. That increases the airflow over aircraft wings and so makes it easier for aircrafts to take off and land. Airports can have more than one runway. In that case, they may be parallel to one another so that aircraft can use both without crossing one another's flight paths. The runways may also be offset at angles that give the air traffic controllers the ability to vary flight paths in response to weather conditions and also to manage the noise pollution caused by flight operations. So here you are basically getting a good image of how important runways are, right? For larger aircrafts, you need longer runways. You can have multiple runways in an airport. They can be parallel to one another. They may be even offset at angles that give controllers the ability to vary flight paths. So runways seem to be very important even in terms of managing noise pollution. We have a nice image of a flight taking off and a couple of images I think that will be explained down the line here. Let's take a look at this. Passenger facilities. The terminal building will also reflect the types of aircraft and the number of passengers that can be processed. For example, larger aircraft can carry more passengers and so efficient boarding and disembarkation becomes a priority. Many airport terminals have gates that are equipped with bridges that permit passengers to enter or leave the aircraft by walking along a movable ramp that connects the terminal building to the aircraft doors. So here we have an image. This is the bridge that connects this bridge directly connects the airport door to the terminal gate. You can just walk from the terminal gate to the aircraft directly. The alternative to these bridges is to tow mobile stairs to the aircraft so that passengers can board or disembark by walking to or from ground level. Passengers may be able to walk to or from the terminal if the aircraft is parked nearby. Otherwise, they will have to be transported on buses. In either case, this arrangement is much less efficient than the use of these bridges. So here we have this movable ramp where sometimes you have to exit the terminal gate and they will board you onto a bus or a van and they'll bring you closer to the aircraft, which is probably parked in an apron, and you basically have this movable ramp and you move upward on the ramp. That is an alternate, but it seems to be less efficient than the use of these bridges. But it all depends on the size of the airport, the number of gates, and the ability for and the number of taxiways and the ability for and also the availability of terminal gates, because if you have multiple flights and not enough terminal gates, you might use the alternate movable ramp option to take passengers to flights. Arriving and departing passengers enter and leave the terminal building using entrances and exits that are referred to as gates. So the points of entering and leaving the terminal building are known as gates. Terminals are designed to encourage the safe, secure and efficient flow of passengers. Departing passengers must carry a boarding pass in order to proceed through airport security and also so that they can board their aircraft. Boarding passes can often be downloaded to mobile phones by app before arriving at the airport, but most airlines offer either staffed or automated check-in facilities, something that you see here, automated check-in facilities where you don't really have an officer assisting you. Automated check-in facilities to assist passengers with checking in when they arrive at the airport. So boarding passes are extremely important, and nowadays with modern technology, with the use of the mobile phone and these devices, these points of check-in that can automate the entire process, you can easily check into an airport using your boarding passes. You can even get them printed right when you're entering the airport. If passengers have suitcases or other large items of baggage, then they will check those in when they arrive at the airport. Airline tickets usually specify the weight of baggage that passengers are permitted. Cases are weighed on arrival at the airport and accepted into the baggage handling system if they weigh less than the permitted maximum. If they weigh too much, then passengers will either have to reduce the amount they are carrying or pay an excess baggage fee. Once passengers are checked in and have deposited their hold baggage, they must proceed through airport security. So first you enter, you get your boarding pass printed if you don't have it, then you check in and you deposit your baggage. Then the next stage is you must proceed through airport security. That ensures that the passengers are not carrying weapons or objects that could otherwise endanger the aircraft, its crew, and its passengers. The areas of the terminal that are open to the public are known as landside. So when you arrive at an airport, this is where you land, the landside, right? Where the general public also, your relatives, your friends, family, everyone can be. These include check-in areas and other facilities for departing passengers. They also include spaces for those accompanying departing passengers and meeting arriving passengers. So there is space for the public. Passengers are advised to arrive at the airport well before their flight. And so most airports provide retail and catering facilities, both to occupy passengers and to generate revenue. Airports usually rent retail and catering spaces to third parties. In many countries, tax laws permit retail sales to passengers who are traveling to foreign destinations to be duty free. So when you arrive at an airport and you go through the airport security, you arrive at this space, retail and catering space, and those spaces mostly are duty free because sales taxes, which means that they are exempt from sales taxes. Retailers can then pass on some or all of the benefit of those tax reductions to passengers in order to stimulate sales. Airport terminals must also cater for the needs of arriving passengers. In order to be permitted to offer international flights, airports must provide adequate facilities for border control checks. These include passport and immigration checks to ensure that arriving passengers are entitled to enter the country and have any visas that are required. Baggage must also be checked by customs and other government agencies to ensure that it does not contain any prohibited items or that any import taxes are paid. Hub airports must cater for the needs of transit passengers who are waiting for their onward flight. That usually involves elaborate retail and catering facilities, because passengers may face waits for several hours between flights and can also include the provision of lounges and other leisure facilities where passengers can relax. So you basically get an image of a passenger's journey after you enter or after you arrive at an airport. Slight addition is that hub airports even offer elaborate spaces because you've got passengers waiting for long time durations until their next connecting flight is taking passengers. Alright, so this section is on boarding passes and identification. The areas after security are known as airside. Public access to airside is restricted. So public, the general public, friends, family, loved ones cannot go from landside to airside. Only passengers with valid boarding passes, who have valid boarding passes, can move to airside. Each boarding pass has a barcode that can be scanned optically. Boarding passes are checked at security to confirm that the holders are eligible to travel. They are also scanned at retailers' points of sale to ensure that sales tax is charged to passengers taking domestic flights, and also to collect data that can be used for marketing purposes, such as identifying frequent travelers and tracking their buying habits. Finally, boarding passes are scanned when boarding to confirm that the passengers are on the correct flights and to create a definitive list of the passengers who are actually on the aircraft. So right at the gate, when you are just about to enter the aircraft, also you have to present your boarding pass, and they are basically creating the passenger manifest and just ensuring that you are in the correct flight. Airport employees and staff employed by retailers and others who work airside must also pass through security and must wear identity badges. These kind of badges, here you go, issued by airport security. Security badges have radio frequency identification chips, RFID chips, embedded in them that can be read by electronic scanners like this, built into door locks. Locks are programmed to restrict access to authorized badge holders only. So here you have a very elaborate piece on how important airports take security, especially after incidents like 9/11. Security became a very important aspect, and airports globally elevated their security measures drastically to ensure airport security at the highest level. Next, we have a piece on transport infrastructure. Airports require extensive transport links. Obviously, passengers and their baggage will arrive and depart throughout the day. Airports and their associates also have large numbers of employees, many of whom have shifts that start or finish at unsociable times. Most airports have good road access and large car parks. These are often major sources of revenue, with many passengers driving to the airport and paying to park in an adjacent car park for the duration of their trips. Airports often charge premium prices to park close to the terminal, with less expensive parking offered in more distant locations that are serviced by shuttle buses. So you basically even make money through rental services and car parking, major sources of revenue, and most of the passengers can even just park their vehicles for the duration of their trips. Airports can have closer car parks which are close to the terminal, which are a little expensive, as opposed to distant locations as well that have shuttle buses that connect the airport, probably the arrival space or arrival landside space dedicated from the car park. Airports also offer other forms of ground transport such as taxi ranks, bus stations, and railway stations. These generally offer services to the nearest major towns and cities. Some airports have major bus and rail stations that enable long distance journeys on national public transport networks. Airports also require significant road links to carry goods. These include fuel and other consumables to replenish aircraft and cargo that is to be carried as air freight. The airport itself also requires goods, including inventory for the duty-free shops and materials required for airport operations. Most of this material arrives by road, with designated access points for different types of delivery. So basically, as you can see here, transport infrastructure is critical because there's a lot of people, goods, freight, cargo a lot of other elements related to airport security, vehicles, especially in terms of taxiways, shuttle buses, even railway stations at some of the major airports in the world. All of these have to move, right? Sometimes to the airport, sometimes through the airport. The transport infrastructure is very important, and by design itself, airports take this into consideration. Logistics. Airports require extensive and sophisticated logistical support in several key areas. Flight operations require that airports are equipped to refuel and resupply aircraft before they take off. Apart from fuel, lubricants and other consumables required for flight, most long-haul flights require stocks of food and beverages to keep passengers fed and hydrated. So here you have an image where an airport is connected through probably lubricants, fuel, that kind of thing is being pumped into the airport, or other kinds of services is being offered. This is not a hangar. This is happening at probably an apron or a taxiway where the aircraft is parked. So these are very important. Airports must be equipped to meet these requirements in an efficient and cost-effective manner. For example, most large hub airports have underground pipes that carry fuel to aircraft stands, thereby avoiding the need for fuel to be carried from storage tanks by tanker, with the associated congestion that would be created by tankers having to be refilled. So underground pipes. So here you can basically see a pipe being connected to an underground, probably a fuel storage tank, just much like normal fuel stations that store their fuel. This avoids the need for fuel to be carried from tanks to the aircraft by tanker, with the associated congestion that would be created by tankers having to be refilled. Technicians can use mobile pumps such as this to draw fuel from the pipelines and pump it directly into aircraft fuel tanks. Hub airports that operate long-haul flights usually have industrial kitchens that can mass produce hot meals for in-flight services. Industrial kitchens. These are generally leased to specialist third-party catering companies and so offer a further source of revenue. These kitchens must prepare meals in accordance with each airline's menus. The food has to be ready to be loaded before takeoff. Otherwise, hundreds of passengers may be left unfed for the duration of the flight. The meals must also be prepared so that they meet strict hygiene requirements and will also remain appetizing after being stored for several hours in the aircraft galley. Passenger baggage requires sophisticated arrangements to ensure that each bag is loaded onto the correct aircraft for collection by its owner upon arrival at the final destination. Baggage must be unloaded from arriving aircraft and transported to the appropriate arrivals hall so that passengers can collect their property and leave the airport as quickly as possible in order to minimize congestion. Baggage from arriving aircraft creates a further complication because transit passengers will be connecting to a later flight from that airport, and so their baggage will have to be identified and transferred to the correct aircraft for its onward journey. Items of baggage are tracked using standardized labels that are attached during the check-in or baggage drop processes when passengers arrive at the airport for the first stage of their journeys. The barcodes on the labels conform to international standards, which means that they can be scanned optically by the equipment used at any airport. The barcodes identify the owners and also the flight numbers from the point of origin until the final destination. Scanners help baggage handlers to sort items of baggage to ensure that it is directed correctly. either to the arrivals hall or the next flight. So you basically have a view on how important logistics are for fuel, for food, especially through industrial kitchen services, then passenger baggage, and next, in addition to passenger baggage, most airports provide air freight facilities. Large airports often have warehouses that can be used to expedite the shipment of loads. Air freight is often used to transport high-value items, partly because of enhanced security and partly to avoid tying cash up in expensive inventory while it is transported by land or sea. Perishable goods such as seafood and exotic fruit may also be transported by air to get them to market while they remain fresh. There are also specialist shippers such as companies who transport valuable livestock, including racehorses by air. So even perishable goods, valuable livestock, other kinds of air freight are all transported, and therefore sometimes they need enhanced security on top of the fact that you need to move them fast because you don't want a lot of cash being tied up in expensive inventory. So all of this is taken into consideration, and air freight is considered one of the most efficient ways of freight transport or freight logistics management in the world. Some freight is carried on specialized cargo aircraft. These can carry large loads and relatively bulky items but do not have seats for passengers. Freight is also carried in the baggage holds of airliners alongside passenger baggage. So there are two options. Some use specialized cargo aircraft. You might have seen classically, all these flights that are fully branded as FedEx or even DHL flights. DHL was doing this in a massive way a few years ago, about 10 years ago, 10-15 years ago. Air freight was a major deal. So you would have seen these specialized cargo aircrafts, but also nowadays it's basically a mix where the baggage hold of passenger airlines use some of that hold for passenger baggage, rest of it for air freight. Couriers and postal delivery companies also use both passenger and cargo aircraft to carry packets and documents. So I remember, funnily enough, we had in November 2019 a very interesting company as the pre-scene that was Runabout, and that was a courier company much like DHL and FedEx, and they used aircrafts to deliver packets and documents. All right, so next we have an image on revenues. Airports classify their revenues into three main categories, typically weighted as follows. So they say, according to the pre-scene, airport operations companies earn revenue through three segments: aeronautical, non-aeronautical, and non-operating. So most of the revenue is made up through aeronautical and non-aeronautical, where 56%, that is bulk of the revenue, is coming from aeronautical revenue streams. 40% roughly is coming from non-aeronautical revenue streams, and about 4% is coming from non-operating streams. Let's try and understand what these are. So aeronautical fees are basically the money that you make, or the money that airliners or airport operations make through airline companies. What airline companies pay to the airport operators is what majority of aeronautical fees comprise of. So for example, landing fees. A charge is made every time an aircraft lands or takes off at the airport. Landing charges are affected by the size of the aircraft and the time that it will spend on the ground and the facilities that it will use. For example, it costs more to park at a gate equipped with a bridge than to park at a remote stand and transport passengers to and from the terminal by bus. So landing fees have to be paid. Passenger charges. Airlines must make a payment for every passenger who arrives or departs on one of their aircrafts. That charge is usually combined with the landing fee. Then terminal fees. Airlines must pay for the use of terminal facilities to board and disembark passengers. The basis for charging depends on the relationship with the airline and its presence at the airport. So the terminal fee charges depends on the relationship with the airline and the presence of the airport. Like if there is an airline like NoFly in our case that has a very close relationship with a particular airport like CCI in our case, the charges may be premium but also discounted, etc., etc. Some major hub airports have more than one terminal, one of which may be leased in its entirety to a single airline. So some have multiple terminals. That enables the terminal to be branded in that airline's colors and makes it easier for transit passengers who are continuing with the same airline to change planes. Airlines with a smaller presence might have a lease that grants sole use of one or more departure lounges and their gates within a terminal. Again, that allows for branding that may be cost effective if the airline has several daily flights from that airport. Finally, an airline might simply pay an hourly rate for the use of a gate for the duration of the time spent on the ground. Airports typically charge these aeronautical fees in their home currencies. Typically, revenues from aeronautical fees are insufficient to cover operating costs in their entirety. Most airports rely on non-aeronautical revenues to take them into profit. So these fees are charged in home currencies, possibly because of the convenience, because you've got, you can have multiple airports in multiple currency jurisdictions. On top of it, these seem to be not enough to cover your operating costs. So maybe they come close to break even. And how you can go into the profit space is by the non-aeronautical revenue piece, this piece. Let's try and understand what they are. So here you basically have a snapshot of a breakdown of non-aeronautical revenue. Some of them, green color here, are commission based, which means they're probably paying a part of their piece of their revenue, these third parties, and some of them are direct, that are directly coming to the airport. So assume that the green elements where the airport operators allow third parties to offer the services in the terminals and in the parks and in the spaces, whereas the yellow is revenue that is directly being charged by the airport from the service providers. So commission based, you've got fuel sales, retail and dining, car parking and car rental. Whereas direct revenues, you've got revenue like property and real estate, recharging utilities, advertising, etc. So this is not an exhaustive list. If you properly notice, even in the financials, we have a breakdown of aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue, which you can analyze when you go through the financials. Now let's pay attention to this explanation. Non-aeronautical revenue often takes the form of commissions paid by third parties for the right to operate at the airport. For example, retailers pay airports a commission calculated as a percentage of their gross revenues in return for retail space. Non-operating revenues include interest on bank deposits, government grants, and subsidies. They are not usually a significant source of revenue. So mainly it's the aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue elements. Aeronautical, you have fees like landing fees, passenger charges, and terminal fees. Non-aeronautical, you've got commission based and direct revenue coming from various different services that are provided through the airport. Then we've got a section on landing slots. So we already came across this term, we would have, and even you will notice how slots are a very competitive, component that offers a competitive edge not only for airports but also for airlines when they acquire slots. Let's try and understand what slots are. Each airport's operating capacity is constrained by the number of landings and takeoffs that its runways and their surrounding airspace can accommodate. Even in ideal conditions, the runway itself cannot be used constantly because the airflow from departing aircraft creates turbulence that must settle before the next aircraft can be permitted to touch down or to take off. So you would have seen, right, when aircrafts like they're high up on the air, they leave a trail behind them, right, a white, it's like a smoky trail. That is that turbulence, and it is very dangerous to enter into that stream, the airflow stream, before it settles down. That is what they mean there. That can be a particular problem when a small aircraft is following behind a larger one. Also, air traffic control regulations require a safe separation of aircraft, both vertically and laterally. That restricts the number of aircraft that can be lined up to land on any given runway at any one time, or that can be vectored into the same area when taking off. So you've got a very important set of information about the restrictions, about what restricts an airport's capacity in terms of landing and in terms of the number of flights that can take off even. The number of aircraft movements that can be scheduled for any one day must also be restricted to allow for contingencies, such as adverse weather requiring an increase in aircraft separation, delayed aircraft disrupting flight schedules, and in-flight emergencies that may require priority over scheduled landings. Also, the runway itself may have to be closed temporarily to check for debris that could damage aircraft, or because of local weather conditions such as high winds blowing across the runway, making it dangerous to land. So not only just manual restrictions and constraints, even the weather can be a serious concern that can limit airport capacity. Finally, some airports are unable to operate for 24 hours a day because of the noise pollution that they create for residents who live under the flight path. That is a particular problem when aircrafts are taking off. Local regulations may mean that aircrafts cannot be permitted to take off or land between the hours of, say, 2200 and 0600 in the morning. Some airports have sufficient capacity to accommodate all of the flights that airlines wish to operate from them, and so these constraints do not really matter. It may be that airlines have to collaborate over scheduled arrival and departure times to avoid congestion at busy times of day. So while there can be airports with a lot of reasons that capacity is limited by, there can be airports that have sufficient capacity but also would need to collaborate because the timings, which is what we are getting at, are limited. Popular airports often cannot accommodate all the flights that airlines wish to operate from them, and so they have to restrict availability using a system of granting slots. So end of the day, the limitation is mainly time. You only have 24 hours, and within 24 hours there is only a maximum number of flights that can take off and land, and that is what we refer to as slots. Slots are the means of denoting a label that we associate to the availability of capacity, and the term is very frequently used, so please be familiar with this. A slot is essentially the right to operate a flight from a particular airport at a particular time and on a particular day of the week. A particular time on a particular day of the week. That is what a slot is. This approach to restricting flights at busy airports operates globally, although each country has its own detailed regulations governing the use and ownership of slots. If an airline wishes to start a new passenger or cargo service from a busy airport, then it can apply to the airport for a slot. If the airport has a suitable slot available, then it can grant it to the airline. So that's how you acquire a slot. If you want to start a new passenger or cargo service, you have to apply for it. Then the airport will consider and basically evaluate whether a slot is available and grant it to you. Once granted, the slot belongs to the airline. So slot ownership is for the airline once granted, not to the airport. And airlines can exchange slots with one another when it is mutually convenient to do so. They also buy and sell slots. The slots themselves can become very valuable, with individual slots being sold for millions of dollars. If airlines do not use their slots, then they can be withdrawn and reallocated by the airport. If an airline has no further use for a slot, then it makes sense to sell it before it can be withdrawn. So while the ownership is retained by the airline, after they acquire it, if they don't use it, the airport will take it back. And then we arrive at this segment called air traffic control. Right? So just like how the traffic on roads is, there is traffic on the air traffic, and that has to be very carefully controlled. Flights through controlled airspace are managed by air traffic controlling systems. These combine radars, computers, and human operators to monitor aircraft movements. Commercial aircraft are fitted with transponders, which are radio beacons that signal the aircraft's radio call sign and navigational data, such as the aircraft's altitude and direction of travel. That information is tracked by air traffic control computers and is displayed on screens that are monitored by air traffic controllers. So basically, there are radio beacons in aircrafts, and each aircraft has a call sign, and the navigational data is tracked by air traffic control computers, and these are monitored by traffic controllers. Safety regulations restrict the number of aircraft that can be in the same block of airspace at any one time. Air traffic control ensures that aircraft flight paths do not create collision risks. That's the most important thing, to eliminate all collision risks. The need to maintain safe distances can cause disruption at busy airports, especially those serving large cities that have more than one airport and so have large numbers of aircraft in the same vicinity at any one time. Any disruption can quickly become cumulative. For example, incoming long-haul flights that are delayed by bad weather will have priority because they are already in the air and must be allowed to land while they still have sufficient fuel to reach the runway safely. Air traffic control might then be forced to delay short-haul flights from taking off because they have to use the runway in order to prevent congestion while the delayed long-haul flights are in the landing pattern. Air traffic control is managed by national governments. The Noland Air Traffic Control Service is responsible for managing the airspace over the whole of Noland and in the skies up to 100 kilometers from Noland's coast. Air traffic control is responsible for all in-flight safety matters. Airports cannot direct aircraft that are airborne and cannot instruct aircraft to take off or land without clearance from air traffic control. Airports do, however, require constant updates from air traffic control in order to manage operations on the ground. For example, an incoming flight might be expected to land 40 minutes behind schedule, which could disrupt the airport's plans for parking and unloading that aircraft. Similarly, air traffic control might decide to delay the departure of a particular aircraft because of bad weather affecting part of its route. That could create a number of operational issues, including the need to disembark passengers back into the departure gate area during the delay. So basically what we understand is that air traffic control plays a significant role and they have a significant amount of control. The national governments own air traffic control. Airports do not have permission to ask a flight to take off or land without clearance from the air traffic controllers. They have a large amount of information. They track navigation information. They also manage any kind of delays, manage air traffic, manage the landing patterns, and ensure, well, basically play the role of ensuring the smooth operations, end of the day, of taking off and landing. Airports can receive air traffic control data, so we can receive this data, but cannot transmit data to air traffic control. For security reasons, air traffic control requires pilots to update them about the status of their aircraft, such as a need to delay takeoff because of technical problems, or even if they are in the landing pattern, if there is not enough fuel, they might have to urgently land, and in that case they might need clearance. They might need to connect to the air traffic controller base and inform of this limitation. So air traffic control plays a major role when it comes to managing an airport, and as such they are a key stakeholder. Remember that they are a key stakeholder which we don't really have a lot of control over. They have a lot of power, and therefore it might be very important and smart to maintain good relations with them. And that marks the end of segment 1, where we've looked at airports and air travel, and we have tried to understand what an airport does, how an airport works, and basically after reading this 13-page piece or the extract from the pre-scene, I feel like we have a very thorough understanding, a very good understanding. Now it all makes sense, right? If you have taken a flight, you know, if you have gone through an airport, the process, now you can relate this understanding to that experience where you realize, all right, you arrive at the airport, you check in your baggage, you go through airport security, then you arrive at airside, then you wait until your flight, then they announce, you go to the gate in the terminal, they check your boarding pass there, you enter the aircraft, you fly, you land, you arrive at the airport, and you leave. So there's a lot of services, a lot of things that are going on, and our field, our company, will learn about it in the next segment. We are an airport operations management company, and our job is to ensure that operations within an airport is running as smooth as possible. There are so many things that needs to be done, so many stakeholders we need to take care of, so many passengers that we need to ensure that we provide high quality service. And I hope that as senior finance manager of our field, you're really excited to provide this service very effectively, very efficiently, and on the exam day, when they offer you problems and challenges, that you are ready to face those challenges in a way that will just get you through the exam and make you pass. Until I see you next, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Happy learning.